And I'm curious, Emma, what your thoughts are on this about people who are operating from a position is like, I can't, back, a Biden in 2024. This what we've seen right now is too devastating. The whole harm reduction strategy. When you see the context and what the actual reduction means, doesn't seem like enough for people. I'm just curious, on your thoughts, on that
Yeah.
question.
I wish I had more coherent thoughts because like before this I've said that I'm voting, for Joe Biden. I had said I'm voting for Joe Biden in New York just because like I'll say it on the program and I want someone in Wisconsin or Michigan who hears what I have to say to also heed that example for the most part. And I want to live by it and vote in New York in the way that I would want my brothers and sisters in other states to vote in order to mitigate harm. But um I think about this every day, like right now. Because I've never in my life had such a I had such a moral question about my vote. And I think it'll become clearer in the months to come. That's really all I have for you, to be perfectly honest, because I'm probably a little bit more lib than you guys, and that always has been my philosophy. But I'm feeling a little shaken in that, given my passion about obviously like the Palestinian issue, as they call it. I know
Mm.
that's not a great answer, but I did remember what I was going to say earlier because if that's okay with you, Dave, if you don't mind, if I ask this question to you, can you hear me?
Mhm.
Yep.
Okay. So, because I really don't know at this point. But I'm wondering what you guys think about the geopolitical strategic importance of Israel as being kind of a submerged driver for the Biden administration and for people behind the scenes and whatever we call the deep state, whatever it is. The military industrial complex, like the fact that we have this strip of land in the middle of the Middle East that's close to all of these strategic ports to oil fields. It's essentially a de facto, like, colonial outpost for the West within within the Middle East, and how that influences things as well. Because, like, I feel like that doesn't necessarily get talked enough about because Israel is portrayed with the mysticism of religion behind it as opposed to like the geopolitical strategy. But I mean, before it was uh, Israel as a country, it was a British colony, and there was a reason behind that. What is essentially your read on that as one of the more submerged factors that we're dealing with here?
I'm curious what you think on this, Max. We actually haven't talked about this too much, but I think that one thing that's really notable, that does make the steadfast support of Israel that you get in America a little retro, is that like before there was this kind of argument that like, oh well, there's support, for Israel in the kind of like anti-Soviet position, right? Just to prevent maybe some kind of pan-Arabism, or socialist movements maybe taking power in the region. Israel could sort of be a bulwark against that. If you look at the region, obviously Iran is a country that the United States wants to see, ended, but Saudi Arabia, the vast majority of the Gulf states are all very much moving more into the American and the European orbit. That like I don't know if that kind of like that kind of cynical realpolitik argument about Israel like holds as much water as it might have held in like the 70s and 80s and 90s.
I think you're right. I think you're right, but but that was potentially, I would say, part of what created whatever the Frankenstein monster is. Now we basically have, like, if we're talking about the strategic value of like having access to the Suez, right? The Suez Canal. We've bought off Sisi and Egypt to such a degree that that's kind of in the bag, and that's part of also why the Rafah crossing, it's just like hilarious, as if people can just from Gaza can just cross all the way through, and there's no difficulty in
Mhm.
crossing that border or whatever. It's because the CC is acting with the interests of the United States in mind for that reason, because of the amount of aid that we give them. But yeah, I think that it's now become, and I don't know when that point turned, a deep like geopolitical quandary and negative element for the United States. But I just wonder when that shifted and what like the when it shifted, and if that even really necessarily was like something that was one of the main drivers for a lot of folks before.
Yeah, I mean, John Mearsheimer, who has upset a lot of people for his Russia stuff, but also before he was pissing people off for that, which I think Mearsheimer, I don't subscribe to his political philosophy, but to say he's an academic and he was doing work on the Israel lobby. He wrote a book called The Israel Lobby, and that goes into like definitely an argument that like AIPAC will make, which is you need us. You need us there. You want us on that wall. You need us on that wall, sort of thing. But as Mearsheimer and his co-writer point out, like during the Iraq War is kind of actually a big problem. They needed Israel to really stand down. That's why you see some of George Bush being like, "Hey, chill, Israel, because you're going to make us look like we're trying to conquer the world if you start acting up, because people like interpret your actions in a way that they don't quite interpret ours yet." And I think Norm Finkelstein has and I can't remember what his critique of that chapter is in one of his books. So I think there's like open debate about that, but I think like whichever way you come down on it, it's contradictory, right? As you say, this is not helpful to American interests, what's going on right now. To any sort of initiative or any sort of marshalling of world opinion, we're fucked. Like it's a complete embarrassment now.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and I think it's also notable that you see very different leaks coming out from the State Department, or like I think a shift in like how Lloyd Austin presents publicly about what he feels about Israel versus what Blinken and Biden do, which is like full on Zionism. And I think there's just like a recognition in the Pentagon that this is actually quite disruptive to whatever U.S. strategic interests are in the region at this point. And so it's that at this point, like we just come back to it. It's ideological for Biden, and that is actually quite scary.
Yeah, and back to your voting point. I mean, my thing is, and I'm not going to vote for Biden in New York, but I generally my philosophy hasn't changed much. It's just like whichever coalitions, particularly Labor, want you to go vote for, just do that. But I also, but my main issue with the and why I say the thing about that, in addition to the I'm not voting for Biden, is like I also think there's a wrong message to send that like this is we're empowered at the ballot box to not empower a genocide heir, because America is that. And I think the best case I would make for having a democratic power now is they're not able to pretend anything otherwise. This is, I think, very educational for a lot of people to understand actually the problem we have with Zionism in the elite parts of government, and it is a bipartisan issue. And for me, like it needs to be led by things like the UAW coming out in support of a ceasefire. Like that's a sort of or Starbucks workers even. Like I think that sort of stuff. That first of all, that's going to lead to a more courageous member of Congress, whether it's like Greg Casar or whatever. Like I think like that stuff, you're not going to see any bravery over what you'd expect if it isn't led by something, both people in the streets like they've been, or these sorts of other movements standing up and saying, this is what we want in our name. And there's this guy, we need to get him on the program. I'm forgetting his name, but he's the leader of the Mail Union, and he's an anti-Zionist Jewish guy. And I need to look that up. But like
the U.S. Postal Workers,
Diamondstein, I need to look it up.
But USPS?
Yeah, I believe it.
Oh, that's really cool.
Mark Diamondstein, he's got this piece in the Nation. As a union president, I stand with humanity and calling for a ceasefire. I lead a union that stands for equality, international solidarity, and so I don't like this. If people like decide to vote for Joe Biden because I think that is perfectly fine, because I don't think I think Noam Chomsky is fundamentally correct when he says like this conversation where it's always magnifying glass put on election day, it couldn't be more beside the point. The point is to build up these other organizations which can actually draw a stark contrast between the power structure, which is supporting mass murder right now, and point to a better future.
So just because I think it's fair, since we asked Emma and you just gave it given my kind of update here is I've always sort of maintained I've never been somebody who actually advocates for people to vote for the Democrat against the Republican, or the other way, of withholding your vote, because I just don't think that there's any kind of coherent block necessarily in this country. If we had an organization that held 20% of the electorate or something like that, and that's an organization we're saying we'll do lesser evil or we won't do lesser evil, then it becomes actually politically meaningful. What we're talking about right now is individual decisions in an unorganized political movement. And for me, the air and the energy and the passion and the disagreement and the breaking and the dysfunction that comes out of the argument, I find to be very boring, frankly, and not particularly helpful. Though I will say one thing that has sort of moved me particularly, recently, has just been this idea that if this isn't a punishing thing for Biden, I think the message that sends to the Democratic Party is devastating. Right? If Joe Biden can get away with this and they're able to sort of be people are still afraid, super afraid of the right wing, that people will still fall in line, that we don't actually need to move on questions of genocide. I think that's a really devastating message, both internally and most importantly for people in the rest of the world. I mean, I think something like this has to be seen as a lesson to Biden and the Democrats, that supporting something like this, allowing something like this to happen, is just a non-starter. And that's sort of where I've moved from being somebody who's sort of passive about it generally, and just sort of whatever people do, to moving maybe into a more of a strong camp of saying I don't think that is.
My skepticism is just that the Democrats don't really learn any lessons anyway about anything in when they lose elections, and usually the lesson is to move more towards the right. Biden has some
the lesson of 2016. Sorry, Emma, but the lesson of 2016 wasn't that people were fucking sick and tired of the shitty recovery that Obama gave us. It was that they were too sexist to anoint Hillary.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And Russia or something like that. But I mean, and although, I mean, I would say, I think that there were some Democrats who weren't Clintonites that started to get it. And they had the instincts to understand it but from a leverage point. The problem with the presidential election is that we do not have, to bring it back to your guys' point about labor, enough labor density in this country to really get elected officials on the presidential level to feel that kind of pain. I think the best avenue for me from electoral, from an electoral perspective, and getting the supporters of this genocide to feel the pain, is from going at Democrats in primaries on that scale. So I haven't decided really what I want to do in New York, because I do think about things like abortion. I think about Trump saying he wants to come in and do the Insurrection Act on day one. And I know that my vote won't really matter in New York, but it's about how I want to weigh those opportunities to between two options that are going to be the only options available to me, and lead in that way. So that's really my perspective on it when I talk it through. But if it were to happen today, I genuinely don't know what I would do based on that. But we're going to have to I think there will be some things that shift. We talked about it on the show today, but Trump being so invisible for the past few months and not doing any of the debates has really helped him, because people forget what it was like. and what it was like to have him be the president for that period of time and the chaos that engendered.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, the calculation, unfortunately, the cynical one that Biden is making when it comes to the support of Israel.
I mean, that's the Democrats' only play right now. It's sort of like, look at the right. And, you know, the thing that I think is really helpful. I mean, and abortion too, for sure. You know, but I'll say the thing that really is helpful is when you look internationally on this too, is this is actually just the strategy for the center left across the board, all across the globe is the same thing. It's like, look how crazy the right is. We're going to maintain our certain kind of status quo things. I mean, this is what happened in Argentina recently. This is over and over and over. It's just like, if we can point to the right and say how bad they are, you know, that's going to be a winning strategy. And look, some elections, 2020, that worked. There's no doubt about it, right? 2016, it did, right? You know, so it's not like a foolproof political strategy. And again, like for me, I will just say, like, on an interpersonal level, I'm not really worked up about what other people feel is right or wrong to do. I will say, as organizational level, I think UAW not endorsing Biden is something that I very much, you know, support. The DSA continuing to not support Biden, and just for the record, because everyone always gets confused about this, DSA never endorsed Biden or any of these folks in any of these elections. I think, and media operations too, I think, you know, should be a little careful about endorsing something like this. Again, at the end of the day, whatever people do is going to be an individual decision, because no one is voting in any kind of real coherent block at this point. That I think that you can really spend a lot of words and burn a lot of friendships over this in a way that is not particularly helpful. But for me, more and more, and again, it's the opposite of y'all in New York, but in Texas, it's the same kind of thing. The result is, you know, and Cornel West, somebody who I have a tremendous amounts of respect for, you know, who might be the person who I end up voting for, you know, that wouldn't even be a vote in the sense of thinking that was going to do anything either. And I think that this is the thing that makes nobody happy, right? Because people who are sort of, you have to vote for the Democrat, or else you're basically supporting the right wing, or get mad at you. And then like the people who are like, well, our vote is our opportunity to express ourselves politically, get mad when I say I don't really think it matters. But that's sort of where I'm at right now.
Yeah, well, and I can predict my mission is going to be the same. If Trump wins or if Biden wins. If Trump wins, it's, yeah, motherfucker, don't support a genocide if you want to, and do actually something on student loan usury if you want to turn out those voting blocks. If Biden wins, it's, well, on balance, like labor supports you, and also the other people aren't any better shakes on Israel, and so like the message is just still the same, and because like ultimately we're not authoring the outcome in any real sense anyway, because we don't have that coalition.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, I always will say that I think voting is about like a piece of strategy, and it's about how you want to strategically express yourself. If you choose to, you're in a blue state, or if you feel like your vote is not necessarily going to translate, I understand that. I'm still in the like a little bit of a harm reduction mode, but like that's where we differ a little bit slightly, I'm sure.